everyone, I'm Carol Anne Riddell, and welcome to a special edition of Book It. In this episode, we are taking a look back at two of our favorite interviews from this season, highlighting writers who are also part of our CUNY family. We begin with best-selling author Ayana Mathis, who's also a distinguished lecturer at Hunter College. She's now out with her second novel, The Unsettled, a story about three generations of one family set in the 1980s. Ayana, thank you so much for being here.
It's such a delight. Thank you for having me.
I really enjoyed the book as well.
Yay.
So the book centers around three main characters, as we said, from one family. For people who might not be familiar with it, can you just tell us a little bit about how the story unfolds?
There are three main characters, as you said. One is a woman named Duchess, a kind of formerly itinerant blues singer. She lives in a fictional town that is both a real place and a kind of a spiritual homeland in the novel, which is on a bend in the Alabama River. Mm-hmm. Her daughter is named Ava. Her daughter left, like sort of as a part of a kind of great migration movement, but also because there was a lot of, the situation home was fraught for many years. Yes. And she is estranged from her mother. After kind of wandering around for a while, she settles in Philadelphia, where she has a son. He's the third kind of main character in this book, and his name is Toussaint. When we meet him, he's 10 and 11. And when the book opens, they are, Toussaint and Ava, that is, they are living in a homeless shelter because of, well, for many reasons, but the immediate cause is the dissolution of Ava's marriage to her ex-husband, now ex-husband, Amy.
And we learn early on in the book, from Toussaint's perspective, that his mother is in prison. But it's quite some time before we understand why his mother is in prison. And again, without giving anything away, I found that to be a really fascinating way to start the book. Can you tell us a little bit how you arrived at that?
I knew that the book needed a prologue, and I knew that someone needed to sort of speak from beyond the confines of the narrative proper. And to sort of give it a context, because it's not a confusing book, but there are a lot of moving parts, and there are these three poles, and so it's, so I wanted something that almost felt as though you were sort of in the future looking back at this thing.
Right.
And I think the interesting part about that prologue is that, it mentions it's in Toussaint's voice, more or less, or from his perspective in any case, and he's talking about how his mother is in prison, about how he wants to go and see this grandmother he's never met.
Right.
That's Duchess in Alabama.
In Alabama.
And the interesting thing, though, is, as you said, we don't know why she's there, we don't know what's happened, but this kid that's kind of speaking from the future. And I wanted him, he always is kind of the future in this book.
Yeah.
And so I wanted this voice that was a little bit outside, that would lend context and lend some hope. And that would also, just from a sort of fun writer's perspective, I think that often readers that I've spoken to have kind of gone back when they've gotten to the end of the book and been like, oh, that's what was going on in the prologue.
I did that.
And that's a fun thing.
Yeah, it is a fun thing to do. So as you mentioned, the book goes between Philadelphia and Alabama, where Duchess is. And all three of these main characters are struggling with the concept of home. You've got Ava and her son Toussaint, as you said, in a shelter in Philadelphia when we meet them. And then Duchess is also trying to save her hometown from developers. So talk to me a little bit about the concept of home in the book.
It is of inestimable importance in this book. It is kind of the pole that everyone is kind of revolving around. Bonaparte in particular, it's sort of the place that everyone is either trying to hold down, as you just mentioned. There are 5 people left in this place, 5 old people. It was once a very thriving town.
Yes.
They're it. So they are very much trying to preserve this place, in part because of the land itself. It was hard won for them to get it, and for them to keep it means everything. But it is also kind of a spiritual home.
Yeah.
It was a place where they could be free in periods in the United States history in which, of course, it was very difficult for Black people to do that and to be that. And for Ava, though she's left, in a certain sense, she's always kind of trying to recreate it. And I think of Duchess in a way as the past, connected to this land. Ava is a sort of very unsettled present. And then there's her son, who has never known Bonaparte. He was never there, he's never been there. It's this kind of myth in his mind. And he's looking for home too, but he doesn't even know what that might look like.
Yeah. Duchess had to be fun to write because she's spicy and she curses a lot and she's funny. She kind of jumps off the page. And it was interesting to me, Ayana, because you You switched to the first person in her voice. What was behind that decision?
You know, I don't even think it was a decision. You know, sometimes when you're writing, something is just a gift. She came to me in first person in that voice, and I was like, I'm not gonna mess with her. That's who she is, that's how she wants to be, and there is no point at all in trying to make this woman be anything that she doesn't want to be. And also, it was just, you know, there's so much of the rest of the book is entirely in third person, often a very close third person, but third nonetheless. And there's a very particular kind of immediacy with her. And also she has to carry so much of the history, not only of that place, Bonaparte, but in the book, I think. And somehow to also put that history in third person seems as though it would have been too far away. So to have this very immediate, very urgent first person voice, who is nonetheless often talking about the past, I think it gives a certain liveliness to the book, and it enlivens the history, it enlivens the past in a very particular way.
Your descriptions of the homeless shelter are so raw and specific. I could really feel how dehumanizing that experience was for Ava. Talk to me a little bit about what you wanted readers to take away from those descriptions. I was particularly struck by the fact that she's often referred to in the shelter by her room number, as opposed to by her name.
Certainly that dehumanization. And also I think, you know, we have a lot of narratives about different kinds of people in different sorts of places, right? And so when we think of, maybe when we think of a homeless shelter, there's a sense in which we also don't know exactly what that looks like, right? Or we have a received idea of what it might look like from, I don't know, the news or something like that, right, that we've seen. But I wanted it to come alive, and I wanted it to come alive very much through Ava and Toussaint's experience of it. And I also wanted to sort of poke a little bit about the ideas we might have about the sort of people who are in a homeless shelter. That was very important to me. And I think lastly, I was really interested, you know, it's hard for them to be there, not just because, of course, because it's very difficult to be homeless, but the labor of kind of being very poor, right? And this sort of futility of it. There's something a little Kafkaesque about it. You know, she's supposed to go to this job center to apply for jobs. But nothing ever really happens when she goes to the job center. She just gets a form stamped and then they send her back. So there's all this kind of intense doing and labor and going here and going there. And it's all a little bit futile at the same time. And so I kind of wanted to explore that a little bit.
Both Ava and Duchess in the book are very complicated as mothers. They love their children, but they are both neglectful in some ways as well. What are you saying about motherhood and our assumptions, our standards, the judgments that we make?
Certainly that, I mean, the biggest thing, of course, that motherhood, there is no kind of cookie cutter motherhood, right?
No.
Like there is no sort of, that's a good mother and that's a bad mother and this is what a good mother looks like. It might look different. It might look different, of course, from family to family. It looks different racially sometimes. It certainly might look different if you're in a different class position. So there's that. And then I think there's also just the idea that these folks have a very different set of challenges and also priorities around what it might mean to care for someone. And the ways in which they go about doing that might be very different from other people's ways of going about doing that. But it doesn't mean, as you said, that they love their children any less. But it does sometimes mean, in the case of both of the women in these books, that their love cannot always ensure them safety. And very often, in fact, in both cases, Duchess and Ava, as mothers, it doesn't necessarily bring safety to their children. I
read in an interview you gave that when you think about your core identity, you still, sort of your understanding of yourself is as a poor black girl from Philly. So I wonder how that understanding shapes your writing.
I think it shapes every aspect of it. You know, the sort of what I think is beautiful are often people who are, I don't like the term, but I have yet to think of another one, people who are on the margins, you know? Folks who are living in a different sort of way, who might have a different relationship to the mainstream, who might have a very different set of resources than people in the mainstream have. Those things, to me, that is kind of my default humanity. It's what I think is beautiful. It's what I have the most questions about. It's what has pained me the most. It's what I'm obsessed with. It's what I'm the most curious about. It's what I most don't understand. It's what I most admire. It's just sort of a big sort of juggernaut of every sort of question and every sort of admiration and every sort of fear and every sort of trepidation that I have. So I just keep on writing out of it.
And you've written about your childhood. You've said that your mother struggled with mental illness, and you describe what sounds like a fair amount of instability in those early years.
Absolutely.
She loved you fiercely.
Fiercely.
Is that part of what drives you to dig into motherhood and that mother-daughter, mother-child relationship?
I think so, but in a way that's not direct. Like, I never think to myself, now I shall write about my relationship with my mother. but I seem to sort of have a kind of obsession with mothers and children, whether they're mothers and like actual children, like Toussaint in this book, or whether, like in the 12 Tribes of Hattie, my first novel, those children were adults. But I seem to be very interested in the sort of obstacles to understanding the depth of someone's love.
Yeah. It's an endless well of material, I think, right?
Endless.
I do want to talk a little bit about your journey as a writer, because you mentioned your first book, The 12 Tribes of Hattie, which really thrust you into the spotlight. Oprah Winfrey chose it for her book club. I mean, your first book.
I know.
What was that like for you?
It was nuts. It was the most surprising thing that has happened in my life. I wonder sometimes if it'll be the most surprising thing that ever did. You know, I published that novel. It was my first novel. I was 39, maybe I was 40. I think I was 40. So, you know, I was sort of a later in for a writing life now. You know, it was kind of later in life, entirely unexpected, and my life changed. I mean, complete 180 from one day to the next, you know, especially at that point. That was 2012, the end of 2012. The media was different. Social media wasn't really a thing at that point. And so very much it was TV and newspapers. And Oprah's reach at that point is still, of course, immense. But at that point, because media was less sort of siloed and dispersed than it is, it was just, you know, a friend of mine said it was almost like this giant eye in the sky just kind of opened on me one day. You know?
All of a sudden, the whole world knew you.
Every newspaper, all the TV. I mean, it was nuts to be articulate about. It was nuts.
And I understand that when she called you, Oprah called you to tell you that she'd chosen your book. You didn't believe it was her on the phone, right?
Yeah, she called me 2 months before, and she said, you know, there was a whole kind of ruse that I thought it was the books department and the editor was calling me, et cetera. So we'd set up this appointment. And then it was her, and she says, hi, it's Oprah Winfrey. And I literally said, no, it isn't. And then we went back and forth about that for a while, and then we got into it.
So it has been some time since that first book and this, your second book. Was it hard to get started again after that whirlwind?
Yeah, it was really, really difficult. It took quite a few years. I mean, this book, I think, is just, this book meaning The Unsettled, is just, it was a more difficult book in many ways than Hattie was. So the writing of it itself took longer, but it also took longer to get there. I think because, you know, writing is such a, in many ways it's very private and it's very contemplative, and requires a certain amount of discernment and sort of silence in your mind. And it was just really loud in here for a long time, and I kind of couldn't hear myself, and I couldn't make, you know, this sounds as though I'm complaining. Obviously, it's the biggest blessing of my life, or one of them. My mother, I think, is the biggest blessing of my life. But, you know, it was so loud, and I couldn't hear myself anymore, and I couldn't decide whether a paragraph was a good one or not, whether a direction was a good one or not.
Yeah.
It was all just kind of like the Washington Post and the New York Times, where I was yelling at every sentence. It took a while for that to quiet.
Yeah. You also teach at Hunter, I know, in the MFA program.
I do.
Is there a particular piece of advice you give your students about writing?
I give them so many pieces of advice. They're so sick of me.
I doubt it. I highly doubt it.
One of the things that I tell them, which I think is really important, is to be honest as you possibly can on the page, all the time. And part of that pursuit means, if you can, never writing to the thing you know how to do, always writing to the thing that you don't know how to do. That's where the magic is. That's where the real work is. And that's where the discovery is. Because if you don't discover anything, your reader's not either.
Thank you so much for all this time. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you. Really very grateful.
Thank you so much to you. Such wonderful, wonderful questions. It's a delight.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me here.
Appreciate it. Now to our interview with award-winning author Robert Jones Jr., a writer who is also a graduate of Brooklyn College. His first novel, The Prophets, was a National Book Award finalist and became a New York Times bestseller. Here's our conversation. Robert, thank you so much for coming in today.
Carol Anne, thank you so much for having me.
I want to say first that I was so moved by your book. It is in many ways a raw and painful novel in terms of what you expose about slavery, but at its core, it's really a love story. It's
Indeed.
really a love story.
That's right.
Can you tell us about that?
Yes, so the book is really about Samuel and Isaiah, two enslaved young men on a plantation in antebellum Mississippi who fall in love with each other. And the book explores how that love transforms not just them, but everyone around them, enslaved and enslaver alike, and how it resonates through time, to give it an origin point.
This is your debut novel.
It is.
How did you decide that this was the book you had to write?
It was the one that terrified me the most. I knew that if I wrote a book like this about a period of history where many Black people feel is sacrosanct, that we don't talk about it, that we don't expose certain things about it, that scared me to have to sort of contend with that point of view. And also I wanted to talk about something that we normally don't talk about in these communities, which is how did queerness exist in that time period? So those two things together kind of scared me. And I said, well, if I write this, I'm gonna take a lot of flack. I might upset some people, but it is something that I have to do because part of my job as a writer is to be a witness for those whose stories haven't been told.
Isaiah and Samuel are at the center of the book, but in the way that you tell the story, we see them and we understand them from the perspectives of many other people. Why did you decide to approach them that way, as opposed to just have them tell their story?
That's a very good question. And the reason is because I believed that love needs witnesses, that it has to be testified to, and it has to be testified to in ways that are not always complimentary, because love can be a scary thing. It's so deep and profound and it's transformative. And I think James Baldwin once said, one of the reasons why we're so afraid of touch is because every touch can change you.
Yeah.
And so I thought about that when I was writing this book, and I said, well, I wanted a perspective on how each of these characters feel about what they're seeing here, so that it gives a fuller picture for the reader about what this love actually means.
The book deals very candidly with the sexual violence on the plantation, including this horrifying practice of essentially like forced breeding. And you said in an interview that you learned about this as you were researching the book. Tell us how that comes into play in terms of what happens to Isaiah and Samuel.
So at some point in the United States, it became illegal to import slaves from out of the country. So what that left, the option that left for enslavers was to breed slaves on.
It's hard to even hear those words, and
because they're human beings.
Yes.
And so it's so strange. And so they would set up these farms that were specifically for breeding enslaved people. And it's horrific. It's when you're reading it in the archives, you're just thinking, this can't be real. And it was absolutely real. And so in order to ensure that you got the optimal number of new slaves, you had to ensure that the men and the women were producing as much as they possibly could. And if you were homosexual, you would not be able to produce. So you had to be forced to be heterosexual. And that's how that comes into play in the novel, because Samuel and Isaiah are kind of like, I don't want to do this because I love you, not all of these other people.
Yeah. It's hard for me to also understand how we don't know more about that chapter of history.
And currently, we're trying to erase it even further in this country.
I want to talk a bit about the women in the book, because in some ways, to my reading, they are victimized twice. They are enslaved, and to some degree, they're also victimized by just men generally, the men around them. And yet, at the same time, the women are such strong characters. These
are the women in my family. I had the great fortune of growing up with about 3 generations, maybe 4 generations of women in my family. My siblings, my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and my great-grandmother's sisters in particular. My grandmother was one of 11 children, my great-grandmother.
Wow.
And her eldest sister, Annie, was who I visited every summer as a child in South Carolina. And she would take me on her porch and show me how to shuck corn and snap peas and to plant and to harvest. She lived right across the street from a cucumber patch, which was huge. And she taught me a really, really great deal about self-reliance. She built her own house with her own bare hands.
My goodness.
And she protected herself. She would walk the roads of South Carolina with a razor blade in her jaw, just in case anything jumped out at her, whether man or beast, to protect herself. They were self-reliant women who did not believe in being dainty or knowing a woman's place. They were not those kinds of women. And that was what really inspired me when I was writing all of these characters. I was thinking of Annie and my Aunt Maggie and Feedy and all of the sisters when I was writing these books.
It really comes through. So you are a Brooklyn College alum, and you also got your master's degree there.
I did.
But you were not a traditional college student. Tell us a little bit about that journey and how you ended up here.
So after I dropped out of high school and got my GED at maybe 18 years old, 17, 18 years old, I knew I had to go to college because that's the next logical step. But I was unprepared. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no clue. I took psychology because I thought that would be respectable, flunked out, tried again, flunked out, tried again, flunked out. And then at 31, I heard on the Oprah Winfrey Show that you should follow what you know is your purpose, the thing that you've been escaping your entire life. And for me, I've been writing since I was 6 years old. It's the thing that brought me the most joy, but I never thought of it as a career. But at 31, I went back to Brooklyn College and said, this time I know why I'm here. Lowest grade I got was an A- the entire time.
I just love that story. I love that story because it's inspiring, and it also speaks to so much of what I think this university does well, which is to really embrace that non-traditional path.
I can't think of another institution that has that sort of community that's so embracing and so open. I felt at home immediately upon re-enrolling in Brooklyn College.
So as we mentioned, The Prophets is your debut novel. It has been widely praised, a New York Times bestseller, a finalist for the National Book Award. I mean, your first book. Yeah. What has all that been like for you?
Unbelievable and overwhelming. It's so hard to internalize it. I almost can't believe it. When I'm hearing you say it, I'm like, who is she talking about? It's a dream, and I'm so entirely grateful, but it's so hard to internalize.
And it took you 14 years to write, is that correct?
14 years. Because as an undergrad, I had 3 part-time jobs. As a grad student, 2 part-time jobs. And when I graduated, I had a full-time job. So I had to find the perfect time to write, which was the magic hour, 3 a.m.
Oh my goodness.
I would write for an hour, and it took 14 years.
The acknowledgement section in your book, Robert, is very long. It's almost like another chapter.
Yes.
And I heard you say in an interview that there was a reason for that, at least partially based on the fact that you had gotten some news about your health while you were writing the book, and you wanted to make sure that everyone was thanked.
The day that I walked into Putnam, who is the publisher of the Prophets, I was on the phone with my doctor, who told me they confirmed that I have multiple sclerosis. And immediately my mind goes to the darkest place. What if I don't survive this? If I indeed don't survive it, I need everyone to know who has ever touched my life in a positive way, who has ever encouraged me, who has ever loved me, that I appreciate and I'm totally grateful for that support. And so that acknowledgement section, which for me is really the final chapter of the book, is my ode to all of those people.
And I hope you're doing well now.
I am. I am on a really great treatment that has really helped me with the symptoms and my health. I've never been healthier, in fact.
That's terrific. And you're writing another book.
I am writing another book. I'm 70,000 words into my second novel, which is more contemporary than The Prophets was. And hopefully I'll be done within the next year or two.
Not 14 years this time.
Not 14 years this time.
That's wonderful. Just a last question for you, because I'm curious about this. Who exactly are the prophets?
The prophets are anyone in the world who can tell us something about ourselves to help us move ourselves out of a degraded space into one that is more human, more loving. And that could also be sometimes people who do horrible things, because you can see in them, that could be me if I don't pull myself up, if I don't remember who I am.
Robert, thank you so much for all this time. It was such a pleasure to meet you and to have this time to speak with you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Very grateful. Thank you. That wraps up another chapter for us. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back next month, kicking off our new season with an all-new episode. A quick reminder to check us out on social media. We'd love to hear from you and tell us what you're reading. I'm Carol Anne Riddell. See you next time on Book It.